to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. This is the place where you get both a coach's and sports dietitian perspective on topics important to endurance sports, including nutrition, training, and how these impact and fit into your daily life both on and off the race course. Your host, Coach Justin, certified run and triathlon coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, along with Coach Katie, a registered dietitian with a specialty in sports nutrition and owner of Fuel to Run. Here at the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast is where your journey begins. Welcome, everyone. So this is episode 4 of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin, along with Coach Katie. Today's episode is going to be an extension of what we did in the last episode where we talked about recovery. In this episode, we're going to talk about the nutritional aspect of recovery. So adequate intake of nutrition, timing, and sequencing. We're going to do a little bit of discussion on supplementation, even though supplements is such a vast category, and there's a lot of discussion and a lot of research on it, and a lot, quite frankly, a lot of noise out there in the world. So we're not going to go into too much detail on all the different supplements, but just an incorporation of a few supplements that you can think about in terms of aiding and helping you recover. We're going to talk about the 4 R's in the framework of recovery, which is rehydrate, refuel, repair, and rest. And so we've talked about a few of those, but this time we're going to be talking about refueling and how that's going to help you in your repairing. All right, so I'm going to take a back seat a little bit to this episode, and I'm going to let my extremely intelligent and brilliant co-hosts lead this conversation. So, Katie, it's over to you.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's flattering. Thank you. Yeah. So I think one of the first things you mentioned, or one of the things you mentioned there, was the 4R framework of recovery. And this isn't something that I came up with. It is just something that I kind of found in the research, and it made a lot of sense to me. And it was something I thought I would share with you. So if you're interested, we can always share our links to resources as well. But the rehydrate, refuel, repair, rest, I just like that 4 R's. It just makes a lot of sense. So I think we've already talked about the repair piece, like kind of what that entails, and the rest piece a little bit in our previous episode. But what I really want to emphasize today is that rehydrate, refueling piece, which we did dive into carbs, and I'm going to dive into that a little more today. Just a little more of that carb before, during, and after exercise piece, and how that's so important for recovery. And we'll also talk about protein, so the refueling piece, in more detail today. Also, I think one thing we maybe touched on last time, but not a whole lot, was the rehydrate, or the hydration piece, and kind of how that ties in a little bit to the recovery, why that's important. And then we're, like Justin said, we're going to go into the supplement piece, but we're not, there's so many supplements out there potentially related to recovery, and just supplements in general. So we're not going to go through every supplement, just some that, as a dietitian or sports dietitian, I come across quite frequently in terms of recovery, and a lot of the supplements that people tend to be using the most for recovery. So we will touch on that. Justin, what do you think? I guess, I almost wonder if it's helpful to talk a little bit about, some of our struggles with recovery first, and then dive in, just kind of share a little bit of the things that we're doing, or some of the things we've noticed or struggled with, or we have clients struggling with, and then dive in. Does that sound like it might be interesting?
That sounds great.
So I guess I have a question for you. When it comes to recovery, what in terms of the fueling aspect anyways, and the supplement piece, what are some of the things that you feel like you struggle with, or that you are, or even on the opposite end, that you're doing well, and that you feel like is going well? I know that's 2 questions, but I'm curious to sort of put it back on you.
Yeah, I can say I'm notoriously bad at recovery. And then when we started working together, almost probably over a year ago now, is where I've kind of seen the most improvement in my recovery. Um, One of the things that I kind of struggled with was knowing what to eat, when to eat, and the sequencing of it. So, you know, I've always been kind of the person that's like, I didn't want to pre fuel for a workout. And I feel like maybe that kind of hindered me on some of my stuff and not knowing really what to eat when I was done. Um, I mean, I'll be a little bit vulnerable here, and I tend to be kind of an emotional eater. And so sometimes when I find that, and maybe if I had a particularly frustrating workout or something like that, that I may be more likely to stop off someplace and get something that is going to satiate those emotions. And I don't know if that's maybe hurt my recovery, um, but kind of, you know, planning, I think, is one of the biggest things that we can do as athletes. And it doesn't take much. I mean, it's not that much of an effort, really. I've started like putting stuff in my bag that I know would satiate me if I have, a challenging workout. It was particularly frustrating. Um, I'll put those in my bag so that I'm less likely to kind of stop off and do some, get me a little thing of French fries or whatever to satiate that salty craving that I get. I'll have like kind of like a peanut butter bar or something like that that I still get kind of like that saltiness and a little bit of emotional satiation, but I know that it's going to help me refuel a lot more effectively and efficiently. Um, so those are one of kind of some of the big things. And it's always coming home after the workout. You've got a lot of stuff, and I've been in triathlon for over a decade, and there's a lot of gear that you're dealing with, and it's just like, I just finished, this 3-hour bike ride. I feel like I need to go clean the bike, and, kind of like, oil chains and things like that, make sure it's, in good condition. And what that does, it tends to delay the recovery process and the intake of nutrients. And so one of the things that I've kind of implemented is that I kind of put that stuff off until, you know, I I prioritize the intake of nutrients. So, I'll come home, I'll throw my bag, in my training room, and then I say, okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to make a protein shake right now, and then I'll grab my shower and kind of change my clothes and all that kind of stuff. And then, kind of like once I kind of get myself situated, and I kind of drink about halfway through that protein shake, then there's a little bit of carbohydrate that I put into the protein shake as well, so I'm not just taking in, like 40 grams of protein in one shot. And I can kind of sip on that while I'm like cleaning gear and putting stuff away. And multitasking, I think, is kind of the big thing that I've kind of learned that I'm starting to do better. And I feel like it's helped me with the recovery process and get ready for the next day's training.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a really good point is that planning ahead piece. Like that's I think gonna be kind of key, especially when an athlete like has a long session like that, 3 hours or something really grueling or something very long. I think to have something either with you or that you know you're going to have when you finish like right away to kind of have thought about that at least like this is what I'm going to do instead of sort of leaving it to okay, I've got my workout done. I think sometimes we think, oh, we got the workout done, we've done the workout, there isn't anything. Now we got to do all these other things, we got to go to work or we've got to, like you said, clean your bike or get all your gear out, do all these other things when you get home. And we're sort of putting that recovery piece off because I do think there's this mentality like, oh, yeah, I put in all my work in the workout, but unfortunately, it doesn't end. Like that training doesn't really necessarily, if you think about it this way, it doesn't end when the workout ends. That's kind of almost the most important part is after the workout ends, what you're doing after that to make sure you're actually, you know, like adapting to that workout and getting better as an athlete. So anything you can do to plan ahead is really key. I think of this, I just did a half marathon on Sunday, and that's exactly that night before. I was not only thinking about, okay, what I'm going to have for breakfast, I made sure I actually had pre cooked some oatmeal. So all I had to do is heat it up and it was ready to go. I put all of my gels and everything I was going to take because I was actually adding on some mileage. So I was going to do like 3 miles before and then the race and then some mileage after. So I was going to be eating quite a bit, taking in quite a bit during that. So I had it all planned out. And then I brought, because I wasn't sure what they were going to have at the race, post race. You just never know. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. They don't always say. So I brought a shake, like a protein shake that I put some recovery things in there, some protein powder, a little bit of the creatine that I use. And then I also brought something else that was carby, but no, it was something that was it was a muffin that I had bought like from a bakery. So it was a little bit of a treat. And so I think sometimes you mentioned, oh, you might go and grab something, and is that the best thing? I think we can kind of talk about that a little bit because we do need to get in those carbs. And sometimes our body just wants the carbs. So maybe it doesn't necessarily always matter in that instance. It depends on, of course, on what you're eating and what else is in it. But sometimes just getting the carbs is what's important in that post-workout time frame. So I had thought about it. I brought all this stuff with me, and I had my race, and then I was able to get my carbs, and luckily they did actually have like a yogurt parfait thing that was pretty good at the post race. So I had that as well. But you don't always know, and it's always good to think, okay, what am I going to have after? And if you're driving, if you're going somewhere to work out and you're driving any significant amount of time to get there, to get home, or you have a busy schedule ahead of you, the planning ahead is going to be like so much more important, because it's so easy for us to get home and just get tied into whatever's going on at home, and then 2 hours, an hour later, you're like, oh, I haven't even had anything to eat. And you've kind of missed a little bit of that window. So we'll talk about that. We talk about carb and fueling after exercise. I think that honestly is probably one of the bigger things that I've struggled with too, is just making sure, now that I'm almost in I'm a master's runner, I'm like 41. It's just like, I feel like I could get away with things like a little more in my 20s that now I have to really be emphasizing as I get older. So this becomes like so much more important, because if I don't recover and do that, I can tell I don't bounce back as quickly. I think sometimes even we have to consider like the fueling that we do during our workouts too, like because we talk a lot about post-workout fueling in our last session, but fueling during the workout, making sure you're getting enough carbs during your workout can actually help with the recovery process, because you're not depleting glycogen so much during a workout when we're taking an adequate fuel during. So not only does it help you perform during your workout, but you have this added benefit of recovering quicker. So I always tell people to explore that a little bit. Like, think of a time when you didn't fuel adequately for a long run or a long bike ride, how you felt in the days after, versus a time when you've had a good amount of fuel during and you did really prioritize your during workout fuel. How long did it take you to recover? And in my experience personally, if I'm fueling well during my longer sessions or my harder sessions, I always recover and bounce back much quicker than if I don't. So I think that's always something to kind of consider as well. But I'm trying to think of what, I think those are probably the things people tend to struggle with the most. And I would say we'll get into supplements, but one thing I just want to mention really quickly with supplements is I do think there's this emphasis on taking supplements instead of like, okay, like you haven't gotten the 4 R's. If you haven't gotten those 4 R's, which are again the rehydrate, refuel, repair, rest, like if those aren't like optimized and you don't feel like you've been able to really dial those in, probably supplements are just a waste of your money at that point. So, I mean, there may be a few that will benefit you. I think there's probably still benefit, but don't think that you're going to take some of the supplements like creatine or some of the other ones we were talking about, and that's gonna take the place of adequate refueling and things like that. So I do want to mention that as we sort of dive into this topic. Do you have any more thoughts, Justin, or anything you want to add to that? Or
No, I think just the one thing that I'll reiterate is just planning ahead. It's like, when I do my meal preps for the week, I always prep for, still my meals on Saturday and Sunday when I'm going to be when I know I'm coming home from a long session, because I have long sessions on Saturdays and I have long sessions on Sundays. But I know that my meals are already prepped and they're in the fridge and waiting, so I don't have to come home and then feel like I have another thing that I have to do. So whatever you can square away earlier, so that if you fail to plan, you're planned to fail. Is that
Mhm.
whole that adage. So that has definitely rang true. As I'm in my upper 40s now, I can't. I could cheat recovery. When I was younger. But now not so much. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the biggest thing I'm learning is because I'm trying to train right now, like I'm in my, like I did maybe not necessarily when I was in that overtraining phase, but when I was younger, I'm trying to do the same or similar amounts of training. And that's the thing I'm running into the most is I just don't bounce back as quickly. And so the recovery piece does become very important. So let's dive into carbs. So I think we did talk about carbs quite a bit. At least we did dive into it a bit in our last podcast episode, but let's dive in again. I think it's just worth really emphasizing this because I
I
think this
agree.
is where people do kind of fall off a little bit. Like I mentioned in the last podcast, I think people always think of recovery post exercise, and I think the first thing they think of is protein intake, which we are going to talk about protein. And I don't want to make it seem as though protein is not important because it absolutely is. It's just that in that post workout window, carbs are going to be the most important thing when we're thinking of. I know people have kind of heard of that exercise window, and that's been a little bit debunked in a way when it comes to like protein. We don't need to smash a protein drink necessarily as we're like right away, but we do want to kind of consider eating some carb foods pretty close to when we end the workout. And that is just for a couple of reasons. And I mentioned this last time. It does replenish muscle glycogen. So if you do happen to have like a hard workout, especially if you have double workouts, this is really where it's going to be so important, which is common for a lot of triathletes, some runners who are trying to get a lot of volume. Maybe you're doing a workout and then a strength session or like a workout and then another run or a double run sometimes. So that post workout, that first workout of the day, like getting the carbs in, if you have a double session, is going to be key. And so you really, really want to emphasize it. But even if you have another session the next day, that's kind of challenging. If you kind of miss that recovery window of refueling carbohydrate, it can impact how you are going to perform potentially even the next day. So it's just kind of thinking of, okay, that first hour or so after you're done, making sure you are getting a good amount of carbs. And I said something in the minimum of like 0.5 grams per kilogram for a shorter duration. I mean, this is just general. I think everyone's a little bit different. So it's just when I speak in grams per kilogram and things like that, I think first of all, I think in kilograms. So you do have to multiply or divide your weight by 2.2 to get kilograms, if that makes it easier to figure this out. But it's just general starting points. This isn't sort of any sort of oh, this is exactly what you need. I'm just sort of giving some general guidelines, and then it's up to you to sort of figure out what works best. And then the uptake or the intake of about 1 gram per kilogram is probably good for longer duration, but the longer you go, the more you need. So maybe even higher than that if you're doing like a 6 hour, like 100-mile bike ride or something really intense, you're going to probably need more, but those are just general guidelines. And that really is ideally within that first hour to sort of at least get, at least I would say, 0.5 grams per kilogram, but really trying to emphasize that. And then maybe having a meal with some carbs and getting the rest of it. It doesn't have to be if you're like trying to get 100 grams of carbs at once, that's a lot. You don't necessarily have to have all of that right after, but just having at least a good amount right after as soon as you can, and then trying to kind of get the rest in. But we do have about an hour or two, I would, from the literature, like that there's this window where we're very sensitive to those carbs. Our body's really able to take that up, those carbs, turn them into glucose, and then store them into glycogen stores in our liver and muscle very readily. And the further we get out from training, the less sensitive we become. So the less we're still able to put carbs into glycogen stores. It's not like we like miss that. We just, if we're able to put this much in right away, as the day goes, like we may only be able to like get a fraction of that, topped off. So we can really top it off right away. And then it kind of declines a little bit as the day goes. Just my experience too, working with people who use continuous glucose monitors. What's really fascinating to me, and even seeing this in my own data, and I'm not trying to sell these to people at all, it's just something I've really noticed, is that I can eat like quite a bit of carb in that post-workout window and not have a very big glucose response. Like it's quite a bit. But if I don't maximize my carb intake in that post-workout window and I eat that same amount of carb, but it's later on, I most definitely have a larger glucose response. Like it's interesting. So it's really my body. It's like I've noticed that my body's really wanting those carbs right after. And so that's just kind of something I've really paid attention to. And that's made me like kind of almost like an aha moment. Like, wow, this is actually something I'm seeing happening in my body and with my data. That's very fascinating. So just something to kind of keep in mind is, if you are interested in using something like that to monitor, data, if you like data, that's always kind of a fun experiment to do, is just try to see how many carbs you can actually fit into that post-workout time frame before you actually get a significant glucose response. But that's, maybe a whole topic for a different day. But I just want to kind of emphasize that with the carb post-workout. And then also, I think last time I did mention there's a couple of hormonal things happening as well with insulin and decrease in cortisol that can also help enhance recovery. Is there anything there that you think I'm missing, Justin? Or that?
Yeah, but what I thought was actually really, really interesting is what you just said is, if you eat, a portion of carbohydrate post directly after a workout or within that 1 hour window, and then you ate the same proportion of carbohydrate later, that you had a different insulin response.
Mhm.
To me, I would have thought, okay, well, maybe your receptors are more sensitive the closer you are to the workout, which means that the ability to absorb it is actually heightened, and the ability to absorb decreases the further you get away from the
Mhm.
workout or the training session. Well, what it sounds like is, according to the glucose data, is that's not actually the case, and that you're more sensitive later.
No, it's actually the opposite. So what's that? So when we're looking at the glucose data, what I'm trying to say is like I can eat a lot of carb right after and I don't get a big glucose response. So if you're looking at data, the larger the glucose response, the larger it goes up, the more insulin there is actually being released. So in this case, let's say I finish my long run, like a 18 to 20 mile long run, and I can eat, let's say I'm like, wow, I'm really going to try to maximize this. I'm going to eat 100 grams of carb in that post out 1 hour post, post workout window. I can eat that amount and I'll barely see my glucose levels. I mean, there'll be a small rise, but it'll barely creep up. So that means my body's absorbing that carb and a lot of it's going to glycogen. Like right away, there's no response glucose. So there's a little bit of insulin coming in, just because when we eat carbs, we do get an insulin response. It's just very minimum. So that means my body's very sensitive to the carb, and a lot of that carb is going right back into glycogen. But if I have that same amount of carb later in the day, my glucose values pop up. Like they go, over 140, like they're going up high, because my body is actually less sensitive, so less able to utilize those carbs and become less sensitive to the insulin. And therefore, like I need more, like I'm having a larger response. I need more insulin to cover that later in the day, even if it's the same amount of carb. Like if I save those carbs to later, it just doesn't, my response is much worse. So it's telling me that really I'm able to really utilize carbs in digest and put those carbs right back into glycogen and have a very minimal insulin response after my workout versus later in the day, it's going to be like I might see a very large rise in my glucose status. So just because, the higher the glucose status values go, the likely you have more of an insulin response. So it's very interesting. So that's kind of what I hope that makes more sense now.
It does, yeah. So
Mhm.
are we making the argument that post workout that the carbohydrate should be our dominant focus over the protein?
Yep. That's
Or
kind of
does it depend on the type of session that you're doing? So if I go in and, like, yesterday I had a strength session, and then I think there was a bike session after that. So it's kind of like a double session. They were right after each other. You know, with the strength, because the focus of my bike workout was big gear work. So it was functional strength. So I spent the morning in the weight room, and then I came right home, jumped on the bike, and did functional strength conditioning for the lower body stuff. So, for that particular session, should I be focusing on a protein dominant uh, recovery meal post workout, and then focus to the carbohydrate?
I would say,
Or
like, it's still the carbs are still going to be important because you're still gonna get the protein, so that's what we'll dive into the protein next, but I still think in that session, it may be more one of those things where sorry, you would actually wanna sort of have, like, a meal with both, you know what I mean? Like, you're not, like sorry, like, I have a little bit of a scratchy throat. So it's like you're ending the workout and you maybe like because it's not so endurance, like it's more strength focused and maybe there isn't such you're not out on the bike like for long periods of time or it's not like as focused on endurance or like cardiovascular, like just
right,
grinding out. Like maybe you don't need as many carbs and you don't need to emphasize having necessarily the carbs by themselves right after. You could probably have like a mixed macro meal right after and be fine. So you would then want to emphasize both protein and carb. But I would argue for someone who's doing a hard workout, I mean, great. If you can go home and have a protein shake but not just protein, like with all sorts of fruit and like you have carbs and protein and you can do that right after, that's fine. But if I were to sort of pick a nutrient that I wanted to emphasize for that directly after a workout, it would be carbs. But that's not to say like protein isn't important. It just, that does make a good point though. I think what I'm trying to say is like really hard workout, long workout sessions, like that's going to be even more important versus like a strength based session. Maybe you're doing more of a mixed macro meal after. So you're still getting the right amount of carbs, but again, it's probably going to be less. It's probably not going to necessarily be 1 or 2 grams per kilogram. That's probably too much. It's probably going to be closer to that 0.5 to 1 grams per kilogram, and it will be mixed with protein potentially. So you're just kind of going home and maybe trying to have a meal. That would probably be more ideal. But if you don't have the time, like you're like, well, I'm not going to be able to eat that meal until an hour after you get home. I still think, okay, let's try to have a little bit of carb. It's just probably not going to be like, it might be like a banana or something, just a little something to kind of get that process started, get the recovery process started, and then you have your meal. So it does, I know this is where it kind of gets challenging and a bit nuanced because it really does depend a little bit on the workout. And I don't want people to think, oh, I did a 30-minute run. I need to go home and stick in
yeah,
all these
smash
carbs.
a bowl of
Like,
pasta.
yeah,
Yeah,
no, that does not like, no. This is like purely like, let's talking like hard training, like this half marathon I did I did 18 miles total. It was like a half marathon at, marathon race pace or faster. It wasn't an easy session. Like I needed carbs, right? This is an example of a time when this is very important versus I did a very easy 2-mile run yesterday as a recovery run on the treadmill. And it was like, I was like barely moving. I didn't need to go after that necessarily and eat a whole bowl of pasta, right? That's probably a time when it didn't really matter that much because I didn't really burn through that much glycogen on that 2-mile recovery run. I mean, granted, I probably did need to be taking in fuel yesterday too, but it wasn't as the timing of it probably wasn't as important. So that's what I think we also need to emphasize is when we're talking about these amounts and the carbs right after. It's really for anything that's like at least an hour in duration of high intensity work to like a long run, so very minimum. But anything less than that, you probably, I mean, yes, refueling's good, but you don't need to be like smashing a bowl of pasta right after every single session. Because, we do want to also realize that a lot of endurance athletes don't really want to be gaining weight either. So it's a nice, we gotta balance that. But I think based off of my experience with the carbs and the glucose responses, what I'm trying to say is like if we really should be eating actually the majority of our carb intake. So maybe on a really hard day, my carb needs, let's just say, are 300 grams a day. Like the majority of that should be before, during, and after my workout. Like I can still have a little bit of carbs at lunch and dinner, but I should have like 200 or more of those carbs like in that time frame. But on a recovery day like yesterday, my carb needs might have been 150 grams a day. Like I don't need to be eating that same amount of carbs, and I don't need to definitely be eating that around the workout. So it's, I mean, I still want to eat it maybe around the workout, but it's not going to be as much, right? So that's kind of something to think about too, is the majority of our carb intake really should be in that time frame. If we're eating carbs at 9 o'clock at night and we're like binging on carbs, but we had our workout earlier in the day and it was a hard workout, like you're missing the boat entirely. Like you're just you've missed the mark. You know what I mean? You're not timing your nutrient intake adequately with when you did the workout. And that's going to definitely negatively impact your recovery. So I think that's something too, is really thinking about carbs as fuel and recovery, and that those carbs are there to help us fuel. Now the protein, we can kind of shift into a little more on protein now, because protein is a little different in the way that we don't necessarily want to have all of our protein intake right around the workout. In fact, the protein should be spread out a little bit more throughout the day to sort of adequately maximize muscle protein synthesis and be able to sort of, I mean, if anyone's ever had 50 or 60 grams of protein at once, that's a lot of protein. It's really hard to eat that much. So it's a little bit easier to sort of spread that protein out. So that's an example of a nutrient that should be spread out a little bit more throughout the day. And yes, I do think it's very important to get some protein within the post-workout window. We just don't want, it's not going to be the same exactly in terms of recommendation as carbs, because our protein intake day to day may go up slightly on hard workouts, but it's not going to go up, or on hard workout days, but it's not going to go up so substantially that it's, gonna like the carb intake is what makes the biggest shift, right? Like more on hard workout days, less on like easy days, but protein pretty much stays pretty close to the same. It might go up a little bit. So we just want to think in that post-workout window, like having the carb and then making sure we do have some protein within an hour or two. And it might be a good amount of protein. It might be something like 0.5 grams per kilogram, similar to the carb intake, but we aren't going to go up to like 1 gram per kilogram. It's just like we're spreading that protein out. We should have had protein at breakfast, hopefully. We're now having protein in that post-workout recovery session. We might have a good amount of protein for dinner. So that nutrient's just kind of going to be spread, and that's going to help us recover. In fact, if we don't get adequate protein, it's kind of going to be detrimental in terms of muscle, being able to maintain adequate amounts of muscle. So it's not so much that nutrient is, it is important, but it's not something that's maybe as important in timing as carbs, as long as we're sort of spreading it out throughout the day and getting enough of it. Does that make sense? Or do you have any thoughts or questions on the protein? Or
So if I had to boil this topic down to just like a couple sentences, I would say that the protein is a foundational aspect of our daily intake. It doesn't vary as much day to day, and it's kind of the staple. The one factor that does have some volatility to it is our carbohydrate intake, and that really is that has more of a timing aspect than the protein does.
Mhm.
And so if you're sitting down and you're trying to meal plan for the week, it sounds like, I'm going to have my foundational protein and then I look at my carbohydrate intake while I'm looking at my training plan as well. You can say, okay, this training session I'm doing in the morning, and so this is where I'm going to front load my carbohydrates into the day, and I'm going to have those post workout session, and then I may wean myself off of the carbohydrate, and it lessens as the day progresses. So your dinner should probably be more protein, heavier protein, less carbohydrate, unless you have the situation where you have an evening session. Then it sounds like that might be a little bit more reversed, where you're kind of light carbohydrate morning and maybe a little bit heavier carbohydrate relative to
Mhm.
your other days because you had that training session
That's a good
that
point.
was
Yeah,
that's in the evening. So
that's a good
that
question.
seems that seems to be kind of like the cards that are being dealt. The
Yeah.
carbohydrate is really the the volatility factor in your
Right,
nutrition
absolutely,
plan.
and I think in that situation, that is a really good point because there are people that have sort of evening training sessions and maybe they're training and then having dinner a little bit later. Yeah, the carbs are going to be important. I would argue in that sort of situation, you do wanna maybe emphasize also having a little more carb in the lunch, so you're sort of
It's a
you're
bit of a pre-fuel. Yeah.
yeah, you may not necessarily need, you know, like a that full 1 gram per kilogram. Like you are getting a little more carb earlier in the day because we are more sensitive to carb earlier in the day too, and we're not going to be limiting carb and then having all of our carb at the end of the day. So there
Right.
is like some nuance with like timing a little bit, but we still want to make sure we're having carb like a good amount of carb before and then making sure we are having carb after the meal, even if it's in the evening. We just may not want to be saving, like having the majority of the carbs all in the evening in that case, too. We just want to make sure we're timing a little bit more before as well.
Yeah.
So we're refueling. It's just a lot easier, I think, for evening sessions to get a little larger amount of carb at lunch beforehand versus like if somebody is getting a really early morning session, a lot of people struggle with like, oh my gosh, I can't get
Right.
100 grams of carb before, or like 60 or 75 even maybe hard for some people. So, and that's just the timing of it maybe does differ a little bit how many carbs. And that's where I think it can be helpful if you're like, oh man, I don't know, like what would be ideal for me? It's sometimes helpful to like work with somebody who can help you with that a little bit and timing and how much and kind of figuring all of that out because that makes a really good point. Like I don't want someone to be like, "Oh, I'm going to save all my carbs,
Yeah.
for dinner. I'm going to have like 200 grams all at once."
I
Um,
think one of the key takeaways with this is that we're speaking in generalized terms. We're talking
mhm,
about the average athlete, and we all know that you know none of us are average. We all have nuances that make us different. And so when we're talking about, having carbs here and there and the sequencing and the timing of it, I think what we really need to drive home is this is an experimentation process. You have to you take this information and then figure out if it works for you. And it's like I've said before, it's like a little bit of mad scientist to it. You're just like, "Oh, what happens if I tweak this? How does my body react?" And don't just use it just one time. Say, this week I have an average training volume. I'm going to experiment with this one factor of my nutrition this entire week. And I'm going to document how it made me feel. How did I feel pre workout, during workout, post workout? How did I feel in the evening? Did I get, how was my mood in the afternoon? Trying to document this stuff and just kind of learn from that experiment. And you say, that didn't work for me. Well, now you know. Now you can come back and say, okay, this next week, I'm going to try something different. And I think that's one of the great things about endurance sports and kind of like this journey that we're all on is that we're all different. There's always something to learn, there's always something to play with and experiment with. And that's what makes it fun.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, I think you bring up that experimentation piece is like so important because yeah, I think that's exactly it. Is like, and it's makes it fun. Like, I don't know, something about I love experimenting. I'm really data. Like, I'm the type of person that does like to look at data and loves to okay, how did this impact my sleep even? Like I had a higher carb meal at night. Did that negatively impact my sleep? Or, even things like that is just so interesting to me. And I love that. And I think that's exactly what this is. It's like you are an N of one, you experiment, try different things. If it's not working, try something else. Like none of this is, across the board exactly like everything. Everybody is a little bit different. Some people need more carbs. Some people do better with a little bit less. Even the type of carb, like
Right.
you might find that you can tolerate, maybe more processed carbs right after a workout pretty well. Like that's honestly so I'll do a lot of my sweet treats like right because I know how sensitive my body just wants carbs. It doesn't really care where like exactly where those carbs are coming from. If I'm going to have a sweet treat like I mentioned the muffin, but if it's like cookies or something like that, like I'll sometimes plan my end of my workout and I will go and I will have my sweet treat and that will be my carb. And I know like yeah, and then after that I'm eating my healthy meal with protein and maybe vegetables and like a healthy like sweet potato or something like that. But it's like yeah, that my body just wants the carbs. It doesn't care exactly where it's coming from. And I've seen that my glucose responses are good. Like it's better to do it then than at 9 o'clock at night when I'm going to potentially see like a big response to that if my body's not responding well to the carbs at that point. So it's just I think there's the timing of it matters. Like you can maybe see like, oh, I actually can have my little treat after a run. Sometimes, that's one of the nice things about being an athlete is we can have sometimes those little treats, and as long as we're eating well, 80% of the time, like yes. So I think that's all experimenting. See what works for you, and that's just something I've noticed is working well for me, and it allows me to have some of those foods that maybe I'm not responding to as well in the evening, after my workout. And it's a nice thing I can kind of look forward to after my 3 hour run. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have this thing, and I'm like kind of it's not the reason I'm doing it, but it is definitely a bonus, right? It's not the reason I go do the 3 hour run, but it's definitely a bonus. Like, oh, yep, I'm gonna have this thing. So
Yeah,
I think
we
it's just
still have we gotta have fun. I
yeah,
mean,
you can't be like
we
so
can't.
strict.
We're not professionals, right?
No.
We're age groupers. We're out. We do this as a hobby, something that makes us feel good about ourselves and the way that we view ourselves and our sense of accomplishment. And if you're so wrapped up in, okay, I've got to eat this at this time, I got to eat it before I do this. If you're so regimented, and this is the pot calling the kettle black. I'll be completely honest with you. This is me, where it's just like I'm an all or nothing kind of guy. So it's just like hey, I got to follow this, do this, do this, do this. I got to optimize, optimize, optimize. You get burned out so quickly, and then all of a sudden it just all unravels, and it's no longer fun. So there is a little bit of, okay, I understand the general concept. I may not be perfect at it all the time, but I know kind of like, if I want that treat, I have to figure out, okay, when is the best time for me to have that treat? Not to deprive myself of the treat, is to figure out when is the appropriate time to have it. And I think that bottom line is we're all these are guidelines that we're giving you, and just some rough ideas, some suggestions. You take this information and apply it to your training, what you enjoy, what you like, what your taste buds are like, how you like to eat, how you like to train. um, but I think I just want to drive that point home. It's like we're here to have fun. We're here to add to our lives, not create a huge stressor because we're not optimizing performance and nutrition to realize our full potential. So and it's all in the name of the podcast. This is the endurance athlete journey. It's a journey. So it's not that, there's a defined start and end date. This is a process that we go through. And hopefully some journeys are longer than others. And the goal is to extend it as long as possible. And you're not going to extend it if you're not having fun.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a big point. This is all yeah, it's like you gotta have fun. That's why I mean, I still do eat treats at night sometimes. I'm not saying it's always that, but I have noticed, like, that is the time I can have it, and it's actually almost in a way benefiting me because I'm getting my carbs, and it's like double whammy. But I do eat treat. I'm not like perfect. I think of people think of me like, oh, you're a registered dietitian, like you must eat perfectly all the time. And no, I make mistakes too. And there are times I don't refuel properly because I didn't maybe time my day correctly, and I got back from a workout and I'm like, oh no, now I don't have enough time to eat everything I need to eat. And like it's stuff like that happens to me too. And I do eat I do eat treats, and I do like cookies, so and part of that, like, for me, it's like I run because I love it. I love the process of training. But I do like the fact that, because I have a little higher calorie demands, like I have a little bit more of wiggle room to be able to consume things to, like that on occasion that I enjoy or have and not have to worry so much about it. That's a nice thing. So I think that's important. Emphasize, you bring up a great point,
So
Justin.
one of the things that I wanted to I wanted to walk this back a little bit. We've talked about kind of there's two things that I want to bring up.
Mhm.
The first question that I've got for you is, what do you do if you're working with an athlete who's just not hungry or can't stomach
Mm.
anything after workout? That's probably one of the biggest things that I feel probably many of the listeners who are listening to the podcast are just like, but I'm not hungry afterwards. So what are some I don't want to call them hacks because they're not hacks. So this is not a hack podcast. What are some tips and insights that you have as a registered dietitian, as a long-term athlete, as a long-time athlete, on how to overcome something like that and still fuel for recovery and work with the body that you have in terms of being able to stomach the nutrients? Because if you can't stomach it, you're not going to absorb it and you're not going to do it long term, and it defeats the purpose. So that's the first question that I've got. The second one is, how does adequate hydration impact the body's ability to absorb the nutrients that we're trying to bring in post workout? Because most of us probably don't hydrate. Now there's a hydration strategy and a nutrition strategy. We don't hydrate properly during a session, which makes
Mhm.
sense because the body's under stress, right? And we're focused mostly on like performance and just trying to get through the session. We're not really focusing on, oh, I need to drink, I need to drink. And most people actually drink to thirst, which is probably one of the main problems that I find with inadequate hydration is drinking to thirst
Mhm.
during a training session. So if you come out of a session dehydrated, what does that do to the body's ability to absorb the nutrients that you're trying to take in post workout to fuel recovery? So those are my two questions that I've got.
Yeah, that's a good piece. And sometimes I think maybe in some instances those can go kind of hand in hand. But let's start with the first scenario. If you're not hungry after, which I'll be honest, sometimes this happens with me in the summertime. I think it's common. Some athletes kind of experience this with just hard sessions in general, and it's kind of counterintuitive. You would think, oh, you would be doing this hard session, you're going to be so hungry after, but many people actually have a decrease in appetite that occurs, or even just kind of a general maybe upset tummy that happens after a workout. For me, it's very prominent in the summer months when the heat really gets me, and I do think probably there is a connection with hydration there that we can talk about. But what I so I think it's okay in that instance to rely a little bit on liquid carbs. So it could be like for me, I can do a smoothie after a workout. It's very refreshing. Not some people maybe not even be able to tolerate that, but I will do whatever combination of fruit, strawberries or raspberries, or those tend to be more like, I don't know, tolerable to me because the flavor is good. Sometimes it'll, be various other, like maybe a little bit of banana, and then I'll sometimes add the protein powder to that as well. But I'll do something like that to get more liquid carbohydrate in a smoothie, or a smoothie with protein. Sometimes if I'm okay with it, I'll add a little bit of yogurt or other things to it. But that is one thing. So you might have to rely more on that. If you're like, wow, I don't even think I can get in a smoothie, like that doesn't even sound good, you may have to sort of think about, okay, is there some sort of like carbohydrate drink mix or recovery drink mix? Scratch makes some. I know Morton makes like a during workout drink mix. There's others out there, the tons of them out there that are kind of meant for sometimes during workouts, and some of them are more focused on recovery. So some of them have a lot of carb and maybe a little bit of protein, like almost a 4-to-1 ratio. I think that's true for the scratch recovery. So maybe trying something like that where, at least you're getting in some carb and maybe a little bit of protein in that post-workout window. And then when you do feel like hopefully within an hour or two, maybe you regain your appetite, you can have a meal. So you do, I think, is it optimal? I mean, I think most people would probably prefer to eat their food, like eat their carbs, but, we still want to try to have carbs. So you may have to rely on a source like that, or something very simple, like can you stomach like a little bit of a bagel or something kind of simple, like a simple carb after some crackers or something that might even settle your tummy. So that's, again, experimenting with things to sort of see what works best, but that's where I would go with somebody like that. And then I think along with that, sometimes I think when I have somebody that is having a hard time eating after, I think a common question I would ask is, how are they hydrating during a workout? Are they hydrating, and are they getting enough electrolytes? Because something to kind of consider is when we're dehydrated, or maybe we're drinking a lot of water but not enough sodium and potassium and some of those electrolytes that you might get in like an electrolyte drink, that can almost cause us to sometimes even have nausea. So sometimes we may be having a little bit of an imbalance of electrolytes, or we're over consuming water. I've done that before when I lived in Houston for my dietetic internship. Very, very humid climate. I remember going for a run, like a longer run, and just losing a lot of sweat and drinking a lot of water and being like super nauseous after, like, oh, like I don't feel good. And then it clicked. Like I'm experiencing hyponatremia. I'm experiencing symptoms of low sodium. And I took I had this lemonade stuff, and I took some salt, just like plain old salt, just put it in there.
Yeah.
Drank that, felt better, like instantly. So like sometimes it's actually related to our hydration. And so and it could be not even necessarily dehydration, but maybe just an imbalance of electrolytes there. So that maybe would affect our ability afterwards to eat and therefore get nutrients. So I think thinking about hydration in that way, like are you getting not only like, are you drinking during workouts, but are you actually, maybe you need to add some electrolytes to your fluids during workouts, especially in hot, humid conditions. But if we are dehydrated, like I believe it's like 2%. Like, so if we lose 2% more of our body weight from fluid, it can impact our actual ability to perform and potentially recover, and just our ability. And there may be even some additional, like potentially muscle damage that can occur when we're more dehydrated, that is harder to kind of that maybe exacerbate some of those effects of the muscle damage that can occur during workouts. It's normal, but there may be a link there with hydration. So I do think the best way to go about this with hydration, and we can always do like a session just on hydration because there's a whole topic there almost, but to sort of monitor that, like do weigh yourself occasionally before and after a workout and see like how much have you lost. You can kind of also, if you've taken in any fluid during, you can kind of equate that into the equation. So you're kind of, okay, like I've lost 2 pounds, but I've taken in this much fluid. So maybe you can kind of get an idea of what your fluid needs are based off that. So for 1 pound, it's about 16 ounces of fluid. So you can kind of go and do some equation there to sort of see like how much are you actually losing, so that you don't maybe lose more than 2% of your body weight if you can during exercise. But I think those are all things that we want to consider. I don't know if there's necessarily like a disruption in our ability to absorb. I mean, I think that definitely there can be if you have a disruption in like if you're very dehydrated or you have a disruption in electrolytes, it can definitely impact your ability to maybe absorb certain nutrients or even feel like eating. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts there or things
No,
you've come across
that's
with?
exactly what I was looking for. Because I mean, today's date is we're in late March, so it's March 25th, 2025 when we're recording this, and so now we're starting to approach spring, and we're starting to get into the summer, and race seasons are ramping up, and so I think that's really an important aspect of this conversation is the hydration piece of it to make sure that the food that we are eating pre and post workouts are able to be absorbed and brought and broken down into the body and absorbed. You know that is impacted by how hydrated is the body, how hydrated is the muscle. In terms of muscle damage, like you were saying, going into a workout dehydrated may make the muscles less elastic and less pliable, and the more tight they are, the more chances are that you increase your risk of injury in terms of tendon damage or pulled muscles, that type of thing. So that was what I was really looking for from you is to kind of
Mhm.
get some insight on things that we should consider. You know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. Is like even going into a workout, like, I think like that kind of goes along with the post workout recovery piece, right? Like maybe if you're realizing, I've lost a pound or two during a workout. Like I don't weigh myself before and after every workout, but I have done this experiment before. I kind of have an idea of like what I might be losing based off various temperatures or conditions. But let's say like it's if you do that and you're like, oh, I've lost a couple pounds, like to try to rehydrate, you must want to almost have a little more. So it'd be like 20 to 24 ounces per pound. You want to sort of try to rehydrate. So that'd be in addition to whatever your normal hydration needs are to try to make sure after in that post workout window that you are also emphasizing. Now I'm giving you one more thing to do, but like you do want to emphasize the hydration piece, right? So that next time you go out, you're not going into the next workout in a sort of dehydrated state and putting yourself at more risk. So I think that's a good point, to just thinking. And one thing I think people are like, well, how do I know I'm hydrated? Well, just look at your pee. I know that's kind of silly, but if it's darker orange or yellow, you're probably not super hydrated. And if it's like really clear, like does looks like water, maybe you're well hydrated or overhydrated. So it should be like a very light, very very light yellow is probably pretty hydrated. The only caveat is if you do take a lot of B vitamins and like I've had this happen, I take like a multivitamin that has some B vitamins, and sometimes my pee can be kind of a bright, like a very interesting bright yellow because I'm peeing out some of those B vitamins essentially, and maybe some of the vitamin C. So it if it looks kind of funky like that, it may be hard to tell, but that's one way. There are some fancy ways you can test hydration, with urine and test kits and things like that. But I don't think you need to get that crazy with it. Just monitor your, how high, um, how thirsty you are throughout the day. Make sure you have fluids available. Drink to thirst, and then monitor your pee color, and that should be good. You should be good to go there for the most
That's a
part.
good place to start.
It's a good place to start. And if you want to get more science, like maybe we can have a whole electrolyte hydration topic because I think there's other tools you can use to sort of monitor how much sodium do I need, all those. Yeah, because it can get a little bit complicated. But for now, that's a good place to start. So let's move in, like, unless you have anything else you want to talk about
No,
there.
I want to move into to
Yeah,
the
let's go to
supplementation
supplements.
part of it. Yeah.
So this is probably where a lot of people want to heal. Well, I think the other stuff was obviously very important, but people are curious about supplements. So I don't know, Justin. Like, I'll. I don't know if you want to. If you have questions about supplements, like we can kind of go through each one. What do you think is easiest here?
I think my primary questions that I've got is when should I be taking certain supplements?
Mhm.
Is there a timing component that I have to be aware of? and a pairing component. So, if I'm taking these two supplements together, are they counteracting each other? Is one affecting the absorption of the other? So I want to take them at different times. What do certain supplements claim to do?
Mhm.
Um, and so those are kind of like my things. I mean, I am a gastric bypass patient. And so, a lot of my supplementation is because I've had a malabsorptive process done to my digestive system. So my supplementation is going to be a little different than the standard person's, but as a bariatric endurance athlete, it even becomes a little bit more nuanced in terms of my ability to recover and fight inflammation and build the adaptation that I want. But let's just start with maybe a couple of the supplements that you think are helpful to the average person, and maybe we can talk a little bit about sequencing and the pairing of those supplements. If that's
Yeah, let's start with like micronutrients and like a multivitamin because I know that's something that is emphasized. Many people take a multivitamin, but definitely post bariatric surgery, that's one that people take. I think multivitamins can be helpful. I mean, if it's almost like an insurance policy, that's how I think about it. It's like an insurance policy. If you're not eating enough of a certain nutrient, it kind of covers you for that. Like, but you shouldn't rely on a multivitamin to meet your nutrient needs. Eat junk food and then rely on the multivitamin. But it's just kind of there to make sure that you're getting everything you need at the 100%. Sometimes the multivitamins contain more than 100% of nutrients. And in most cases, that's okay. You want to be a little bit careful about the fat soluble, like especially vitamins A and E, not to be taking too much of those, but for the most part, I think like for like a multivitamin kind of anytime during the day. I personally, when I take B vitamins, especially B12, it kind of gives me a little bit of energy. So I don't like taking that at night before bed, but it's kind of personal preference. My husband takes his multivitamins before bed and hasn't have any issues. So that one, when I would say like any time of the day when it works best, because one thing I personally struggle with is remembering to take my supplements. So I kind of have to take them sometimes when I remember them. And, for certain ones, like a multivitamin, it's better to take it, especially for that reason of just covering your bases than not take it at all. So that's also something to consider. But when we're looking at things like some of our anti-inflammatory supplements or our antioxidant supplements, it may matter the timing of it, because if we remember back to the first podcast, we talked a little bit about some of the recovery modalities and how they can blunt like that response, that adaptation response, because there is this natural acute inflammation that occurs post workout, post hard workout especially. And that's actually a very normal process that helps the body. It kind of is this like signal to like, okay, we need to start recovering, we need to start repairing. And then all this stuff starts happening to sort of promote that process. And if we take things that kind of calm that down, then maybe we don't get that adaptive response. So things like curcumin, I think, is a popular one, right? Curcumin or turmeric. So curcumin is a compound in turmeric. And that one, I take it occasionally. I don't take it every day, but I do take it occasionally. And I do recommend the literature on this, I think some of the research, it was done right around exercise. Some of it was done outside of exercise, but I tend to lean towards, let's take that one later in the day. If you have an early morning exercise session, maybe take it later in the day or in the evening and kind of get some of that anti-inflammatory benefits later. So unfortunately, there is no science or research that specifies exactly like the timing of it. Like it has to be timed to this perfect amount, and otherwise it's not, it's going to blunt your adaptation. But the way I do it is I don't take it every day, but I do try to time it in the evening, maybe before bed, so that I'm getting some of those benefits of the curcumin, but not right after my workout. And same, I think, too, with some of our other anti-inflammatories. So like vitamin C or high doses vitamin C is an antioxidant or things like that. I would not take immediately after. the supplement. Now, something like a blueberry, yes, contains vitamin C, but it's not going to be in the high amounts that you would get in a supplement. So you don't have to worry about like food you're eating. It's just supplements. Tart cherry juice is another one that I think you had brought up before we started, but that does have some antioxidant properties, and but it can reduce delayed onset muscle soreness. So there is some research on this. I mean, I take tart cherry juice at night to help with sleep because there is some properties in it that can help with sleep. I think it is helpful. Is it profoundly helpful? Like, does it, always guarantee a good night's sleep? Not necessarily, but I do think it helps. But it does have sugar. So, if you're taking that like right before you go to bed, if it has, even the concentrated amount does have sugar. So that may or may not work for some people who are very sensitive to carb intake right before bed, and maybe they feel like that carb makes them wired a little bit, or energized, or even maybe makes it harder for them to fall asleep. Maybe not the best time. So again, it's all about experimentation, right? Justin, you gotta, like
Yeah.
you mentioned, right, you take the tart cherry juice and it causes.
I do. Yeah. I take a tart cherry concentrate. Um, what I found is that I started drinking the serving kind of like in the afternoon, or kind of like it's well after my workout. So one of the things that I do need to do is I need to move my curcumin supplement from my morning. All right. So I'll tell you right now, sitting on my counter is the old man pill caddy, right? So each day, and you got the little door that opens up, and you take this day's vitamin.
Mhm.
I've got two of them. I've got one for like my morning vitamins, and then I have one for like my evening vitamins. And so I've been taking my curcumin as part of the morning bundle of vitamins. So I'm going to move those to the evening. And so that was a good piece of information. So typically what I'll do is I'll take my vitamins post workout, because that's when I'm going to be eating something. And there's a fish oil vitamin that I have in there that I take, and so I don't want to eat it. I don't want to do that on an empty stomach. And what I'll typically do is I'll take my vitamins with milk, because it kind of helps coat the stomach a little bit. And so then, like, after I finish eating and all that, I'll kind of move my tart cherry concentrate to kind of like later in the morning, or like early afternoon. Um, but yeah, I was playing around with it, like drinking it in the evening, and I was actually mixing it with like my magnesium
Mm.
powder, and I wasn't quite sure if I was getting enough of it, and I wasn't quite sure on the interactions between the magnesium and the cherry concentrate. So I was like, let's just keep them separate.
Right. No, I don't think
But
there's
yeah,
any.
I
I
I
guess
do.
like magnesium could help with sleep as well if you take like a magnesium glycinate or a or L-theanate, or some of those forms of magnesium may help with sleep. But I don't think there's an interaction. But it is like kind of that sugary piece. Like there is
Yeah.
some sweetness and sugar to the tart cherry juice. So if that's something you're sensitive to, but like I personally take that at night, and I'll take my magnesium at night so that I can help with sleep because I do have some issues with sleep. But it is a little bit of like again supplementation or experimentation. Sorry, I got a little bit of a scratchy throat today. So yeah, I think you just want to, but yeah, think about the workout, like making sure you're careful about taking anything with anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties right after. So yeah, I
I'm
feel
gonna
like.
I'm gonna yeah, I'll move my curcumin to the evening. I've also moved my vitamin C to the evening as well, because I felt like I thought I had heard some research from another podcast where if I take like a vitamin D, which I do take as well, that the interaction between D and C would affect the absorption of C. Or there was some vitamin, I can't remember exactly, but there was a vitamin that I was taking, and I was taking both of them, and so they said that there was an interaction between those two, and the it affected the absorption of the C vitamin. And so I said, well, then I'll just take that other vitamin in the morning, and then I'll move C to the evening, which sounds like it was a good decision to make, because most of my training takes place in the morning. And so I'm kind of loading up on the anti-inflammatory, antioxidant kind of type of vitamins and supplements in the evening, where I think that my body has a better chance of working them out and absorbing them as I do nothing but sleep, just lay there. So I think that was kind of a good choice to make. So that's
Yeah,
reinforces what I
absolutely.
thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, and again, it's just kind of, we don't, I don't want people to be like, oh my gosh, we could almost do a whole podcast on supplements themselves and just what to consider with supplements, how to choose the right supplements, timing, nutrient interactions, things like that. But I think in the end, it's like sometimes when it comes to supplements, it's just more about making sure you're consistent with them to even, and then really assessing, is this supplement really working for me?
Yeah.
Like, do I notice the curcumin and doing some of these anti-inflammatories? Do I notice a little bit of an improvement the next day? And they can take a little bit of time. Like some of them, like creatine, for instance, I'll kind of move into that one next, does take time to actually build up in the body. So it's not one of those supplements that you can kind of take one off, once a week or only after hard sessions and notice the benefit. It really does have to be something you're taking on a fairly consistent basis and a fairly consistent dose to actually notice the benefit. So some supplements like that, like maybe are more it's more about consistency, and so it doesn't matter. Like when it comes to creatine, people ask me, when should I take it? I'm like, just take it when you can, because it doesn't really seem to matter. I take it usually after my workout because I just will often take it in a shake or kind of in something fluid, and it's just when I remember to take it. So it's just it's just having the creatine. That one isn't maybe so important about timing. And yes, with recovery, there is a little bit of evidence that it can help with um, recovery. But I would say when it comes to creatine and recovery, I feel like there's so much research on creatine when it comes to like performance, especially for like power and speed, that yes, it's very beneficial, but there's some really interesting research coming out on creatine and cognitive, that perhaps people in their master years, like 40 and above, can like need creatine maybe a little more, that maybe we actually benefit a little bit more from it than somebody that's younger, potentially because maybe we aren't able to utilize it the same. I don't know, but there is some interesting research there, and also potentially in just promoting recovery. So I personally take creatine. I've noticed some benefit in potentially like certain things like my speed and strength in the weight room, but it is an interesting one and lots of benefits to it. Very minimum side effects. So I definitely think that's one. Well, okay, why don't you try it? See if it works for you. There's really, as long as you're taking, like usually I think the dosage is like 3 to 5 grams a day. As long as it may depend a little bit on your body weight, but that's just a general guideline. Pretty safe. There's not a lot of creatine monohydrate. Make sure it's in that form. But otherwise, there isn't really too many downsides. That one you can kind of take when you are able to. We talked a little bit about micronutrients. I think one thing is you could consider too is just testing for certain nutrients. So I just mentioned really quickly here is iron. Iron has a lot of, when we are deficient in iron, has a lot of negative consequences. It can definitely impact recovery in kind of a roundabout way, but mostly because we aren't going to be able to perform very well. We don't have that that iron on the red blood cell to carry oxygen. We're just not going to be able to breathe. We're not going to be able to get the oxygen to where we need it, right? So that can impact a lot of things. So sometimes I think, just if you're wondering, like there are some micronutrient panels you can get. There are, just doing a basic blood panel with ferritin or an iron panel is a good one to do. Vitamin D is a good one to test. That one's pretty easy to test. Some of them, the others are a little harder, so you might want to like look into how to test those. Like B vitamins can be challenging because we really need to test the B vitamins inside the cell to get a good idea if we actually have adequate amounts. It's a little harder to test, but that just a note there on the multivitamins and B vitamins and iron. And then I do want to mention a few others. So I think for the most part, we kind of captured the omega-3 fats would be the one I think you mentioned, and that would be fish oils. And I definitely think most athletes should be taking fish oils, not not necessarily generally exactly for recovery, because there's so many other benefits to the fish oils than just the recovery in terms of like heart health and things like that. But it is going to help. There is a little bit of an anti-inflammatory piece with fish oil. Um, and it is in general going to maybe help us. There's potential research that it may help us with recovery from strength training and muscle. So I do recommend a fish oil. And again, for that one, it does have some anti-inflammatory process, like that can be anti-inflammatory, but it's not one that I would say like you have to be as diligent about. Like I take it at night, but just because when I take it is when I take.
Yeah.
I just
I
take it
split
without.
mine up. So mine comes with 2 doses. So my fish oil is a 2-dose bottle, and so I just split it up. I take one in the morning, and then I take one in the evening as
Yeah,
well.
that works.
So,
Yeah, that works. Yeah. So that's just one I'm like, just get that one. Get that one in if you can, especially if you don't eat a lot of fish. Then we were kind of missing out on those good omega-3 fats that we all need. So
yeah.
yeah. The adapted. So the next category of things is kind of less researched. Maybe there's not a lot of good evidence for, but I'm just going to mention. So they're kind of worth mentioning because they are in my research of supplements kind of came up. So adaptogens would be one. So something like ashwagandha, rhodiola, CBD, or cannabidiols. Those are all sort of in that. I put that in the bucket of adaptogens, and there's really isn't, like, in terms of recovery from exercise, maybe like a ton of research, although they can really modulate potentially cortisol. So when we think of, remember, cortisol is our stress hormone. So if you can bring that stress hormone down a little bit, especially if you're taking those supplements, maybe like during a busy work day later in the day, and you're taking like an ashwagandha tea or a CBD drink, which sometimes I honestly do at night when I'm a little bit stressed because I don't drink alcohol very much anymore. So I'll drink like a CBD drink, and it does help me kind of unwind a little bit. I can sense the little bit of stress coming down and just the relaxation. So really, it's not really necessary. I mean, there maybe is a potential anti-inflammatory effect of some of these, but really it's probably more so just that modulation of cortisol and sort of that ability to get into that relaxed state that we might get from those supplements to help us just kind of unwind, which is so helpful for recovery. So it's not maybe directly impacting recovery, but maybe more so like impacting how we are relaxing and unwinding and what's
Yeah,
happening with cortisol.
it's something to consider if you're the kind of person that kinda struggles with sleep quality.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that sleep is probably the number one thing that we can do to aid recovery is just getting proper amounts of sleep, both in terms of duration and quality. So, if you're the kind of person that it takes a long time for you to go to sleep or you have a hard time staying asleep, maybe considering some of these things before bed might be a way to improve your quality of sleep. And if you can improve quality of sleep, then you can improve your the ability to perform well.
Absolutely. I know there's like a sleep. I don't want to go into my sleep stack too much, but I take some supplements for sleep because I struggle with that. And as we know, like sleep is key for recovery, like one of those foundational things. So sometimes the supplements we take are not necessarily aiding in the recovery itself. It's like helping us get into that relaxed state so that we can recover,
Yeah.
right? So that's kind of how we want to think of some of these. Like another one would be L-theanine. That's one I take at night to help me sleep. It's just like one that's sort of shown to help reduce stress and calming and maybe reducing some of the mental load of training. So again, it's just one of those that I take that's sort of, okay, this is helping me calm down at the end of the day. I mean, it works in addition to other things like actually doing my whole sleep routine, but it's that's something I do take, but it's not because it's helping me recover directly. It's just because it's helping me do something very important that's going to help me recover. Right. So that's another one that I mentioned. And then there's some here that like L-carnitine, L-glutamine, taurine. beta hydroxymethylbutyrate or HMB, like those are all ones I came across, and there really wasn't a lot of research on in terms of recovery. There might be some other benefits potentially, but nothing directly on recovery. These are some that I've sometimes come across in like recovery drinks that are like promoting recovery. And
Yeah.
I don't think we have enough evidence to be like, oh yeah, these are going to help us get shuttle protein in our glutamine. Glutamine maybe is an amino acid that maybe helps with gut health, but it's not going to be one that's maybe directly impacting our recovery from training. So those I just wanted to mention because they are some that I came across. And then something I thought was really interesting was just that maybe more recently I was listening to something and I was like, oh yeah, I've heard this a few times, is ketones, ketone esters or different ketone supplements. And those have been extensively researched, I think more so in terms of like fueling for exercise. Again, that's ketones are what the body produces when we're sort of in fat, when we're in ketosis, when we're burning fat for fuel, we produce ketones. And now we can take these exogenous ketones, through a supplement and get some similar maybe benefits from them. But there's some interesting research now, or people looking into ketones post exercise, and maybe that reducing some of the fatigue that you may experience post exercise. So I'm not sure necessarily. I mean, there may be some benefit to like muscle protein synthesis or some other things that they're still exploring with ketones. But I thought that was an interesting one because I don't know about you, but okay, so I have a 5-year-old son. When I do a 3-hour run, like what I would want to do is come home and just lie on what I probably would benefit me is just maybe lying around a little bit and relaxing and just watching Netflix, or maybe I don't know. I mean, maybe like doing some light activities actually okay in that context for recovery, but I don't have that option. I got to come home and I got to hang out with him. And I'm drained, right? And so I haven't tried this yet, but I'm kind of considering. I have some ketones that I bought just for experimenting. I was experimenting a bit with fueling. It didn't seem to really help me fuel that much, but now I'm considering, okay, let's try it after one of my long runs and see, does this actually help me feel a little bit less fatigued, because that's kind of where I'm hearing it. And it is kind of like a anecdotal thing that I don't know if they've actually done a whole lot of research. Maybe there is some out there. I could dig into it a little more, but I just found that interesting, like potentially a way to mitigate some. So it's not something you would do instead of carbs and everything else. It's just something you would do in addition to help mitigate some of that fatigue so that you could carry on with your day and not feel like totally wiped out, potentially, especially if you have a whole work day ahead of you or something like that. So yeah, those are I don't know if there was any that you were wanting to add on to that or think of, or any
No, that
thoughts.
that pretty much covers what I would. A lot of it is stuff that I'm already taking. Um,
Mhm.
I know that iron tends to be when I have an athlete who's really struggling in terms of like energy levels and things like that. That is always the first thing that I tell them. I was like, "When was the last time you had your iron checked?" Because most people just don't even think about it, and they're just like, "Oh, I'm just tired," or and they just write it off to high stress or whatever, or a high training load, but that may not be the case at all. So especially with malabsorptive athletes as well.
Mhm.
I definitely have experienced with multiple people that have had gastric bypass or some kind of weight loss surgery where they're now on an iron supplementation uh, regimen because of it. So I do it. There was a little bit of indication in one of my blood panels that I had low iron levels, and so my doctor put me on it, and it's just something that I just take every day. But
Mhm.
a lot of the stuff that I'm already doing, some of the stuff I've never heard of, um, and so it's something to consider. One of the things that I do want to mention is that neither you nor I have any connection with supplementation companies. We don't have agreements in terms of trying to get our own athletes or ourselves on any kind of particular supplementation regimen. These are all things that we've experimented with either ourselves or with the athletes that we work with. And so, we're not trying to peddle any kind of regimen in particular. This is just all science based, research based, and experimentation based on our own experiences.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I think that's
yeah.
important to mention, and that's why I try not to list any. I mean, that
Yeah,
might be
yeah,
situational,
neither one of us are doctors. So
yeah.
we're not doctors. Yeah, you're a registered dietitian. But I mean, we're not ordering blood panels and things like so we're not like medical professionals like that. So, if you do have any questions in terms of maybe what supplements you you should consider, it might be worth just a conversation with your personal doctor
Mhm.
and just kind of tell them, hey, this is what my training load is like. This is how I feel pre and post workouts. I'm having a hard time, being consistent. Then that is maybe worth the journey with them to try and
Right.
figure out
Well,
if some of this stuff, and at least you go in with a foundation of some knowledge. So you can say, hey, I was listening to this podcast. These are the types of things that they were talking about. This kind of sounds like something that I'm experiencing. What are your thoughts on it? And just have the conversation with them. I mean, if you get on it or if you don't, then that's the decision that you would make with your personal doctor. But at least
I
we
do,
just kind of
yeah.
we
I mean,
set the table for you.
yeah, I can order lab panels as a dietitian in not every state. I think New York, Rhode Island, and Alaska. I can't, but I can in most states as a dietitian. And I can recommend supplements. The only thing I would say is that you may want to check with your physician if you're taking like a pharmaceutical agent or like a medication, because there can be like supplements can be potent and there can be nutrient drug interactions. So you always want to make sure that whatever you're taking isn't going to interact with something that you're, a medication that you're on. So that may be where you do want to mention it to your physician. Most physicians actually don't know very much about supplements either. Unfortunately, they're not that knowledgeable about nutrition or supplements. So unfortunately, like I do wonder if you might run into that issue of them not really being sure, but they might be able to tell you, or even a pharmacist could tell you whether it's going to interact with any medication. So you do want to always keep that in mind. And everyone, just like a medication, we all might have a different reaction to any compound we take. So always keep that in mind. You don't want to just be willy-nilly taking stuff, and you want to maybe be thinking about, am I noticing any potential side effects? Is this causing maybe a negative consequence? Because it may, in some cases, not work well with you. So you always want to be, I mean, we can always almost go into a whole podcast on just supplements themselves because there's so many things to think about with them, but those for sure you want to be careful. And I definitely agree with you, Justin, on the iron thing. So I've constantly
Yeah.
been battling that. So
The only other piece that I would want to mention is if you are interested in kind of like some kind of supplement regimen, the one thing that you want to consider is taking a quality supplement. Not all supplements are created equal. So if you put on a table, all different brands of the same supplement, the potency of each of those can vary greatly, and the ingredients that are in each of those in terms of fillers and things like that. So it's definitely something to consider in terms of finding a quality supplement. If having a supplement that has been third party tested, where it's considered to be sport safe. If you're considered about you know uh, urine tests and things like that for sport, that is something else that you need to consider on what it is that you're putting into your body to aid recovery, to make sure it is consistent with the sport that you're in and that you're picking a quality supplement, and that whatever it is that you're doing, you know why you're doing it. There's a purpose behind it. Don't just do it because you heard somebody say, hey, this may help. Do it because there's a purpose behind it. It fits into your training plan. These are your experiences, and this is why you're taking it. So that would be my suggestion. Just don't take stuff just to take it.
yeah, don't just take all the things we mentioned today just for
Yeah, it's just like, oh, I'm going to optimize, so I'm
well,
going to take it
I
all.
want to take all these things. Yeah, because and then it's like you don't know which one. is working or not. And that's
Right.
the part of it, is almost, if you're going to take it, I would just add one in at a time and just assess, is this helping me? Is this doing anything for me? Some things may not, in general, like there maybe have health benefits. They may not necessarily, you might not see like a performance benefit, but something like creatine or L-theanine or some of those types, like the ketones, if you take those and you're like, this isn't doing anything for me, or maybe I'm have bowel issues or something because I took this, like, okay, maybe that's not the best one for you. So I definitely agree. Like, you want to be a little bit strategic and careful with supplements, and maybe making sure they are maybe third party tested, and the you don't want to just be like taking anything off the shelf and taking it. So good point. And
Yeah.
always
Do your research.
this 4 R's for recovery first before you even dive into. So get those down. Be good at like the refueling, the sleep, the hydration, then then add on the supplements, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
I think
this it's not a shortcut. So it's like you always hear the adage that you can't out train a bad diet. And I think that you can't supplement a bad diet either. So unless you have, the pieces to the puzzle laid out, just thinking, well, I'll just, rather than take the time to focus on whole foods, a solid nutrition strategy in terms of what I'm eating, when I'm eating it, and how I'm eating it. You're just like, oh, I don't feel like spending that time to figure it out, so I'm just going to take supplements. That that's not something that I would personally recommend anybody, and I definitely wouldn't recommend it to one of my athletes. So get the diet down first. Get the nutrition down. Get your normal everyday, my Monday meals. Get those down before you start trying to overlay, supplements and things on top of that. Because chances are you may not need the supplement if you can get it from a normal diet. So,
absolutely. Yeah, most cases you probably don't. Maybe like, yeah, you might be able to get everything you need just from your diet. So yeah, I think we covered most pretty much everything we wanted to cover
yeah.
on recovery. I feel pretty good about it. Yeah, and I just want to mention, I think we kind of have a couple upcoming podcasts for the month of April that are kind of geared around that topic of meal planning, meal prep for athletes, things to consider, and then also I think it was how to kind of fit in the workouts around our busy schedules. So we got a couple good topics coming up, but I think at least that's what we were considering doing. So things to kind of look forward to. But yeah, I think hopefully this is a helpful topic for people to at least review and be thinking about. I think recovery is so important. So hopefully it's helpful. Any last thoughts?
No, that
Justin?
that does it.
Okay.
So we want to thank you guys for listening. So again, this was episode 4 on the nutritional aspect of recovery. Katie and I, we thank you very much for listening. We know that you have a plethora of podcasts at your disposal, so taking the time to give us a listen to is greatly appreciated. And so with that, we'll close out episode 4, and we'll come to you again in a couple weeks.
Sounds good. Bye,
All right.
Justin.
See you later. Listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Feel free to leave us up to a 5-star review on iTunes and Spotify, because leaving a review really helps others like you find us. Visit the podcast website for other episodes of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast at enduranceathletejourney.buzzsprout.com. Have questions or comments about the podcast? Send Coach Justin and Kate an email at theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. For all things coaching, visit Coach Katie at fuel2run.com and Coach Justin at tabularasaracing.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and remember to find joy in the journey.